I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. If everybody can grab a seat.
He's good with that.
Yes, I did. So this is, oh, the boilers, okay.
But the pressure really is the 1.6.
Yeah. Really. Okay. Jennifer had some questions on that. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. We do have quorum. I'd like to call the 8th meeting of the Budget Committee to order. If everybody could grab their seats, and I may have to do a third time. Can I please call the meeting to order? There we go. Third time a charm here. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. You, of course, can watch us on YouTube at Toronto City Council Live, or follow on your computer or tablet at toronto.ca/council. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, may I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the Budget Committee way back on May 29th, 2019. Councillor Layton will move that. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We do have 10 items that are on the agenda today, so let's go through and we will do a review. So, BU 8.1, Sustainable Energy Plan Financing Program Supporting Toronto Community Housing Corporation. Councillor McKelvey will hold that. BU 8.2, 2018 Development Charge Fund Statement, Ward All. I believe we have a deputation or deputations on that one, so I'll hold. BU 8.3 Capital Variance Report for the 6 months ending June 30th, 2019. Councillor Carroll will move that. Yep. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. BU 8.4 the Operating Variance Report for the 6 months ending June 30th, 2019. Councillor Carroll will hold that. BU 8.5 Reserve and Reserve Fund Balances Report, June 30th, 2019. Councillor McKelvey, you want to move that? Great, thanks. All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. BU 8.6 Information and Technology 2019 to 28 Capital Plan Adjustments and Accelerations and Deferrals. Councillor Layton will move. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Project Cost Adjustments and Deferrals Accelerations to BU 8.7, sorry. Project Cost Adjustments and Deferrals Accelerations to the Parks, Forestry and Recreation 2019 Capital Budget and 2020 to 28 Capital Plan. Councillor Bradford, can you move that? Okay, great, thanks. All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. BU 8.8 Solid Waste Management Services 2019 Capital Budget and 2020 to 28 Capital Plan Adjustments. Mover, Councillor Nunziata will move that. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. BU 8.9 Transportation Services 2019 Capital Budget and 2020 to 28 Capital Plan Adjustments. Oh, Councillor Bradford.
I have questions on that one.
Okay, Councillor Bradford mentioned it first, so I'll hold that with him. BU 8.10 Additional Funding to Support Toronto Police Services Immediate Response to Increased Levels of Gun Violence and to Keep Communities Safe. There are some deputations, so I'll hold that, and I'm assuming that was going to be held anyway. Okay.
Mr. Chair, just to, do we have a, am I missing the, do we have a deputation list? Do we have a consent agenda, any of that stuff?
Yeah, we actually got the deputations in this morning, so they didn't
Oh, I
have
see.
time to print them up.
Okay.
I do,
Okay.
there's one for each, not a lot, but just one deputant for each of those particular items.
Okey-doke.
So why don't we go to BU 8.1, Sustained Energy Plan Financing Program Supporting Toronto Community Housing. Councilor McKelvey, you had some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I was just wondering if somebody could speak a little bit to what type of generators these are. I think it's great that, you know, we need backup power in our high rises. But like, are these diesel, and what is their lifespan? How long are we planning to have these?
Thank you, Councillor. Over here.
Oh, hey, okay.
These are natural gas engine generator sets, and combined, they're more efficient than the boilers that are in place now. Typically, they've got a lifespan of about 15 years, and the expectation is that when they reach the end of their useful life, that they will be replaced by more efficient renewable technologies like PV and batteries.
Okay. Just none of those details were in the report, except that you had mentioned that you had like greenhouse gas savings. The second question I had is, how does this work interface with the bigger state of good repair on our TCHC buildings, and in particular the $1.3 billion that was announced in April by the federal government?
I can't answer that. I was kind of thinking maybe TCHC could. Yeah.
My question was, like, how does this sort of work interface with the state of good repair work that's going on, and in particular, the big announcement that happened in April for the $1.3 million for investment? Like, it seems like this should be included in that sort of upgrade work.
The question about the generators?
Yeah, the generators. Like,
Sure.
yeah, and so like they're funded, like none of that funding's coming from that pot of 1.3, but how is that interfacing? When you're going in and doing this work, are you doing other work at the same time?
Sure, yeah. We try to gang, my name's Noah Slater, I'm the Director of Capital Planning and Design Engineering for TCHC. So when we go in for projects like these, we try to gang it with other work, with boiler work, with mechanical systems work. It ties in usually with our capital work, because we try to target projects where generators require replacement anyway, so it does overlap with capital work in that way.
Okay, and when will all of this work be done? When are these generators being changed?
We're right now in the process of a design-build process, so I can't speak, I wouldn't want to speak specifically, but it's tied to a deadline with the funding that I believe is part of 2020, has a 2020 deadline.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Layton.
Hi, thank you. To our Office of Energy and Environment, there's clearly a lot of work to be done in our TCHC properties for conservation, for demand management. Can you give us an idea of what the total number would be? How much capital funding is necessary in, I'd say, TCHC and our own city buildings?
I don't have an answer for that right here, other than to say lots.
How many zeros?
Seven? It's a lot of money, right? It's a lot of buildings. I know that in our first round with TCHC 2 years ago, we did 9 buildings. That was energy efficiency retrofits and state of good repair upgrades. This initiative is more about resilience. It's the ability to shelter in place, and it makes the community more livable in the event that there are things going on.
But is there other opportunities for conservation in the additional TCHC buildings? And
For sure there is.
what would it take to accelerate some of that work? To, instead of do it in a 20-year capital plan, do it in a 10?
I think that would entail getting, This is something that the City of Toronto can't do by ourselves. We're going to have to attract investment dollars from other parties to do this, whether it's governments or private sector, right? I think we need to look at different business models. Obviously, the one that we have now is good for doing projects, but if we're trying to drive scale, which is really where we are now with TransformTO, we have to look at different delivery models.
Okay, thank you. And just to our CFO, just a question. This is, or a portion of this is captured under unrefundable debt, or refundable debt, sorry. Correct?
That's correct. The savings that will be generated through the efficiencies is not a funding source for the debt repayments.
So just to recap for everyone, when we spend money on conservation and demand management, and there's a repayment of those funds through the savings, it doesn't count towards our debt ceiling.
I have to go back and revisit the policy specifics, but that's more of a cost avoidance rather than a funding source. And a funding source is required for it to be classified as
Refundable debt.
refundable debt.
But if it's a cost avoidance, in this case,
It's a cost avoidance.
it's a cost avoidance and it's being counted as refundable debt.
So we have to go back to the policy to look at how the policy is written.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, the questions that I have already asked offline, but I think it's worth, for accountability, just ask them. Is there anyone, I spoke to TransformTO staff, but is there anyone here from TCH procurement? Anything? So there's no one here. We're adopting whether or not to help them with the $63 million transaction.
So, to be clear, we're from TCH,
Oh,
we're
you
not from
are.
It's
procurement.
not from the procurement department, but we could probably answer.
So, what are the control mechanisms? This is a very large transaction, and if we're going to work with if we're just going to pick one successful proponent as opposed to chunk it out, I'm wondering if you want to go through what the performance evaluation measures will be, and are they staged so that if you are going the one model, what are the accountability measures to protect us?
Sure. We took a lot of TCHC took a lot of pains to create a request for proposals, a public request for proposals that was well vetted and covered the scope of work well. We hired a number of outside consultants to vet that RFP and make sure that it was going to meet our quality standards and meet our technical requirements, and also that we covered the scope of work so there'd be no surprises. Like all of the work we procure as the City of Toronto, it's subject to public procurement scrutiny and transparency. It was a gated process where you go through a number of gauntlets of rated criteria and qualifications and interview till you finally get to a pricing stage, which has a certain degree of negotiations towards the end as well as part of that transparency and part of that process. And then after a recommendation is made, it goes up the level of governances, and obviously for something as large as that, it's well beaded around before it gets to an approval stage.
Right. So but that's the basic process for any large procurement. So the question is, how's the deal structured? If we're going to deal with one person and they're doing 39 facilities, what happens if we're not happy after 7 facilities? What's the staging of the contract?
That's a good question.
That's where I'm going.
Sure, the way it's being rolled out is, first of all, we tendered it in groups so that it wasn't necessarily going to go to one proponent. And then we have a very stringent vendor management program where we track progress, and if things are getting off the rails or we're not happy, there's a number of levers that can get pulled in the middle of projects or whatever to support projects that might need help, and also to change tracks if required.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Speakers to the item? Seeing none. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carroll will speak.
I just want to be clear, it's not that I'm picking on TCHC, but they have had a recent struggle with a procurement. So to make sure that they're structuring this one so that they are able to stage it, to me, on a TCHC scale, this is as large as if we were looking at TTC, which has a much bigger budget, looking at a huge capital project. And you really can't afford to be having penalty clause suits blow back on them. We don't have funds in that corporation. So I just wanted to be 100% clear. I'm happy to hear that it actually was tendered out in stages. The end result may have been that the best proponent won each of them, and you get the best bang for your buck doing it that way. But I'm happy to hear that it went out in stages so that you at least explored that prospect, because that would have been, perhaps the safest way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor of the item? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, we'll go on next to BU 8.2, 2018 Development Charge Reserve Fund Statement. We do have a speaker on the item, Elizabeth Jassam, or Jason. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes,
Excellent.
Elizabeth Jackson.
Great. Thank you very much.
I didn't know that I will be so fast, kind of. I'm trying to
We're quick here at the budget.
be ready.
Most of that.
Anyway,
You'll have 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah, I will be okay. So we are very happy. We came from North York. Our councillor, James Pasternak, is not able to be with us today, simply because finally he had to take his vacation for a week. But we spoke with him last week, and we are very interested, obviously, in our work. And I'm representing an organization which we actually formed not far ago in time, a year ago, and we called ourselves York Center's Seniors Steering Committee. Why we are saying steering committee? Because we are young seniors, active people, and we would like to take care of our business, which is controlling our life for the future in North York, Ward 6. So what we would like to congratulate, first of all, council, that after 3 years of wonderful progressive talks, in July, I believe 22nd or 21st, city adopted this, community benefits agreement document as mandatory, and we are hoping finally that City of Toronto will follow City of Vancouver, where this actually is more mandatory and in use. So we are very interested to know, and we would like to collaborate and work with the city and receive the city support in funds also, that where development charters are going. How we, as community members, seniors and not seniors, and youth and other community members, we can benefit from funds. Today, when we received this document, I was just reading that the city collected in 2018 almost $770 million, which is very good news for all of us. But we would like to know, and I received this report now, that, where this money is allocated, but we would like to know precisely where this money goes, and we would like to have our own input, very controlling input, how this will help us to fight against loneliness, against the dementia, against everything, because we would like to make it happen in our Ward 6. Benefits citizens directly. So where we should go, to whom we need to connect, what we need to do. Can we have your advice, please?
Thank you.
I have this here. This is what we produce. York Center Senior Steering Committee. I can leave with you.
Clerk will actually, we'll pick it up from you and we'll distribute it to.
So what we should do, what is the next step? How city can help us to get the information about development charts?
The purpose of deputations is for you to speak to us. There's not an opportunity for you to ask questions to us. But we can speak to you offline, or actually there's a question from Councilor Carroll, so maybe she can ask. If not, we can talk to you
Thank
after.
you.
Can I just ask, is your organization working on its own, or are they connected? In any way with the Toronto Seniors Forum?
Yes, we were trying to connect, and in fact, more than a year ago, we were trying to connect with Seniors Forum, and also one of the items we raised that we wanted to have Seniors Forum actually at least once a year in North York Center, because for many our neighbors, well, we came today, but for many our neighbors, if they would like to hear and be more active, they simply cannot come downtown to the City Hall. So when we were trying to get to the forum, in fact, I spoke a year ago with, I believe, I'm not sure, the manager for senior strategy is Mr. Smith. And I'm sorry if I'm...
Oh, no, that's okay. The only reason I asked is because local seniors agencies, one of the benefits that they find from having just one of their representatives, one of their members going to the forum is staff do go sometimes to a seniors forum as they happen periodically through the year to present things like presenting the budget, presenting how the city works, so that the representatives might think, okay, that's of value to my group. And then you can ask, can we have someone come and make that presentation to our group? We're about to head into budget season. Today we're doing sort of the regular items of business, but when we head into budget season, to come and do a budget town hall just for your folks and address things that you're focused on, be it development charges or whatever, then they can come and specialize. But working with the seniors forum, you would probably get whoever, they would connect you with whoever has prepared a presentation that's tailored to your needs.
Yes, I'm happy for your comments, Councillor. And in fact, we were a little bit, in trouble moment with Seniors Forum, because a year ago, and just before elections, even though after all we tried to connect, they were still kind of in a mode of organizing themselves. And so they were not functioning properly from our perspective, not giving us a help, and we were told, because not of us is a member of the forum, so we didn't have a voice to say. We can only come to seniors forum, listen like this, and do nothing. So this is exactly why we are not for that. We would like to do things for ourselves. We would like to make a new streetscape projects on Shepherd West from Bathurst to Allen Road. So in fact, all of us, we have an incentive to walk. Because today we are not Danforth. We would like to have an Avenue Road or Danforth style, let's say, planters installed, more light fixtures, more, neighborhood atmosphere on a new streetscape. But we need to have city with us on that. And with the forum, what we find out, I'm sorry if I will be a little bit negative on this note, that we were told that we don't have a voice because none of us is a member of the forum, first of all.
They have.
And secondly,
reps.
we would like to change that, and we think that forum should go at least once a year to Scarborough, once a year to have a meeting to Etobicoke, once a year to North York. So in fact, city citizens could have an opportunity to face the, reality where we are. So that's one of the items we raised, and nothing happened till today. Only we were saying that we have support from councillor and other representatives.
So I sit on the budget committee as a North York Budget Committee member. We've sort of represented the whole city here. But I'm also in the North York Council. I'm your councillor, Councillor Pasternak, Vice Chair. So I'll endeavor to chat with him, Mr. Chair. So if they want,
I'm delighted.
A budget presentation, I can work with James and figure out how that.
I'm delighted for the support. Thank you very much, because I had a meeting with councillor. I set it up at the early July. And obviously, councillors are very busy these days. And when he told me that he's very busy, I said, well, we are here, we can help you. We have our organization. You can delegate work to us, and we can help you to be more involved and be more active for us seniors, all of us. And our word was...
Well, I'll follow up with him. Because it doesn't quite relate to this
we really would like to know, because Shepherd West, as you all know, it's very developed, becoming even more
very
developed
well.
area.
I know it very
So we
well,
are not
yeah.
kind of like not educated people at all, and we understand that city collected, as we know, almost $770 million for the community. So our question is how we can directly benefit
Yeah,
from
I'll
that.
follow up with
Thank
them to
you.
make
Thank
sure
you.
that we
Thank you
we
very
make
much.
that clear.
Appreciate-
Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate your deputation. Are there any questions on this item?
No, I'm good.
Councillor,
To try to give some clarity to the deputant, because this is specific to development charges, and it sounds like a lot of money, but it's very specifically allocated, and it has very little to do with the choice of what we want to allocate it towards. So does the Development Charge Act allow us to apply monies for program-related expenses to developers?
Councillor, through the chair, development charges are collected in accordance with the Act and a background study that the city develops to set the rates, which identifies the projects that the city intends to pursue, for which the charges are collected to offset those costs. They have to be capital projects, they have to be growth-related, and generally, the city follows the project list that's in the background study, with some exceptions where priorities change during the course of a bylaw.
Yeah.
So they must be capital, they must be growth-related.
That's correct, and in fact, the rates are set for, I think currently 18 separate programs, and they're collected in proportion for each of those programs, and those dollars have to be spent in that program area.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
thank you, Councillor Layton. Seeing no other questions, speakers, I'll move receipt. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, we'll go on to the next one, BU 8.4 Operating Variance Report for 6 months ending June 30th. Councillor Carroll, you held that?
Yeah, just a quick question. And it probably is, I just realized I'm getting a revised list here on item 8.8, so maybe my question's answered. I read the whole thing, and I'm happy about that tax-supported operating variance, but I was kind of surprised by the rate-supported one. It turns out, having raised the bin fees, we're now sort of over-collecting on the supersized bins, and we're seeing a lot of increase in bag tag revenues. So I'm wondering, do we just then carry that forward and adjust the capital program? Are we moving on that front with those additional revenues so that by the end of the year we'll see those adjustments made?
They're trying to figure out who's going to answer.
I thought I saw him just a second ago.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, any additional revenue that's generated through solid waste management will offset any pressures throughout the year, and if at the end of the year there's a surplus within the solid waste management operating budget, that will be directed to the reserve, which will then fund additional capital projects or fund capital
Right.
projects in future years, and/or offset any requirements to adjust the rate in future years.
Right. And is that, I'm not 100% remembering this. Is that embedded in policy the same way it is for the tax-supported budget, that it must go to those capital projects? I'm only asking, I see people being perplexed. I see furrowed brows. I'm asking because I don't want to get to the budget process and someone who hasn't been in this room, someone who isn't following the budget as we do and its pressures, comes forward and says, hey, you collected too much money, reduce those bin fees. That's not possible, is it? We still have a capital program we need to put the money to. I'm asking a good question that helps you. Everyone stop frowning.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, again, the fee revenues for the bins are directed by council, and those are collected through the utility rate. Those fees help to fund the solid waste management system, and if there is any surplus at the end of the year, again, that goes into the capital program with the funding.
That's what I'm
moving to the
asking. Do
reserve.
we have an actual embedded, worded protection policy to make sure that it goes to the capital?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, in terms of a policy, the funding with a rate model, the rates that are generated stay within the rate structure within solid waste management and are used to fund the program, whether it's specifically allocated to capital projects or the general operating of the service.
Right,
those
right, I
funds
know
will go
that.
towards
I'm just wanting to know, is it truly embedded in policy that no one could move a motion to alter that in the rate-supported realm?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the councillor, I'd have to look into that, to be honest.
I think we should, because it looks like we're going to be able to really move on some capital now. Let's make sure that we can continue to do that. We don't get caught by surprise. Thanks. I'll have a look at that offline later.
Thanks you, Council. Any other questions? Seeing none, Councilor Carey, do you want to move the recommendations? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, we're going to BU 8.9, Transportation Services 2019 Capital Budget and 2020 to 28 Capital Plan Adjustments. Councilor Bradford, you held that.
Thanks very much. The report is deferring, page 3 there, we're deferring 96 million from 2019 to 2020 and beyond. Transportation Services total 2019 approved capital budget was 659 million. Is that correct? Okay. So of the 96 million, that's roughly 15% of the annual budget. And I guess I'm just wondering why we're projecting the year-end spending to be 450 million of that, and how these delays are going to impact our ability to move forward on a number of our road safety measures and projects across the transportation portfolio.
So through the chair, first of all, yes, that's correct. Our approved cash flow is 659 million for 2019. Of that, nearly 200 million is made up of the Gardner. And if you've got some more detailed questions on the Gardner, Michael can answer that. But the largest proportion of the reallocation is relating to the Gardner, so that's $63 million, which we're pushing out to 2020. You'll recall it's a milestone payment schedule for the Gardner, so the contractor will need to meet certain milestones. The milestones which were originally projected for 2019 were set before the final contract was signed. So now the project is actually moving forward. We've worked with the contractor to realign when those milestone payments will take place. Some of those will now take place in 2020, leading to a projected lower spend in 2019. In terms of our overall projected year-end spend, which obviously links to the earlier capital variance report, from today. So our projected year-end spend is around $450 million, and whilst our year-to-date to the end of June was just under $85 million, and that seems like a big gap, you'll be aware that the very nature of our work is that the majority of our construction work is done between June and October, which means the majority of our capital spend falls later on in the year. What I'm pleased to report is that our spend to the end of August was $180 million, so you can see we've made significant inroads into that. And to set that into context, that $180 million in both 2017 and 2018, it was November before we'd spent to that level. So you can see that we've really got our foot on the pedal this year and are really moving forward with delivering our capital program. Therefore, we're confident that our year-end spend will be high.
And you're confident at 180 million spend in August that you're going to hit 450 million by the end of the year, that closing that gap in the next 4 months?
Through the chair, that's correct. Looking back at the traditional spend profiles, we've traditionally spent between August and December at least an additional $200 million. Currently, we're projecting for the Gardner that we'll spend about $125 million this year. We've only spent about 25 so far, so there's another 100 million of that to come through. So therefore, we're confident that we'll get up to the 450.
So what are the impacts if we're flowing another 96 million from this year's budget into 2020's budget? What are the impacts on delays on moving forward with these programs potentially next year? Like, is that a risk if we didn't get through nearly $100 million in this year's budget, we're putting into next year's budget? When do we catch up?
So our anticipation, because we've moved it into next year's budget, we did have the opportunity to to move it to any of the years within the next 10 years. So we've moved it next year because we're confident that we can spend it next year. So that's when the spend will occur.
Okay. Maybe this would be a question for our CFO. Thank you very much, by the way. You've been discussing with a lot of our divisions and agencies about their 2020 capital budgets, and the question is really how these carry forward funding impacts their abilities to complete projected projects. And I think when we look at these variance reports and we see the year-end projections and we look at the spend rates, and 70% is a spend rate that we're almost shooting for, but sometimes you see stuff lower, sometimes you see stuff in the 50%. How are we asking divisions to make sure that we're improving on those spend rates and try and prevent these, what could be domino effects of these things carrying dollars forward year after year and not actually getting the work done and out the door?
Through the chair, through this 2020 budget process, we in actual fact are taking a different approach to tackle the capital planning. And that is starting off with introducing the concept of projecting the carry forward that's not being spent in 2019 as the opening balance for 2020. So then what we are or unofficially doing is looking at recasting the 10-year capital plan and looking at not only the organization's capacity to spend, but as well as the market capacity to respond to the amount of projects that we have. In addition to that, creating a risk framework that is assessing the validity of the assumptions that are built into the capital projects so that we get better assumptions and better predictability about the timing of the spend, the amount of the spend. And in addition to that, looking at policies that enables organizations and divisions to procure prior to the budget being officially approved. Based on the fact that we have a 10-year capital plan that's been adopted by council, we have a solid idea as to what the volume of projects are going to be. So rather than waiting and for a March approval of a budget and going into a procurement season that takes a couple of months, we're going to be looking at policies that enable staff to continue procurement 12 months of the year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Carroll, you had a question? Oh, I'll get you next. Councillor Carroll, then Zia.
It only just, only because of, it's a follow-on from the last one. So when we get these, while we go through this adjustment phase, where we're really bringing them to what is your real ability to spend, these projects that we're looking at today, we can assume that these are the start. So can we take advantage of, we're doing an early budget this year. We're going to be out the door in February, which should be earlier than some GTA municipalities. We're going quick. Could they be just sitting there with tender in hand, ready to go the minute council adopts the budget on these? Could these be considered first projects to go out the door?
So I can't comment on, through the chair, sorry. I can't comment on which projects will have commitments already in play. If we are changing our policy with regards to the timing of procurement, we have to ensure that that policy is in place prior to a budget being approved. So the policy right now is driving some of the behavior with regards to the timing of our procurement.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm only asking, I was asking about the first out the door because selfishly one of the projects is in my ward. Okay, but I see what you're saying about the policy lag. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you. Scarlett and Dundas. It's been on the list for capital for 20 years now. The underpass, and you're transferring money from the 2019 budget of in Appendix 2, $1,828,000. So can you tell me what's going on? Like, it's been 20 years and we haven't even started.
Okay.
I mean, this is the problem. We keep delaying these projects and there's no reasoning for it.
Through the chair, Councillor, as you realize, we are in the middle of detailed design, so this has been a,
But that was said to me 5 years ago.
well, I can tell you that we're in detailed design and expected to complete detailed design, I believe in January of 2020. Complications, as you realize, are a number of property acquisition issues. So notwithstanding we have a design that's almost completed, we still have an issue with respect to easement and property acquisitions that factor into the final construction project. So that's an issue that we are dealing with our colleagues in real
Well,
estate.
I know, and you know, I'm sorry, but I've been hearing this for years, and it's a project that's been in the books for 20 years. When can we tell the community, after we've had all these public meetings, when we're actually going to put the shovel in the ground? This is very frustrating when you see these capital projects that keep getting delayed, and you know, we need to have an answer. And I understand, you've been explaining this to me, and you know, like it keeps going on and on from year to year, but I just don't get it, why it's taking so long. And I'm really getting frustrated. Because right now, we're redoing Scarlet Road. It would have made sense if we did the underpass at the same time and not have to dig up the road twice.
Through the chair, I can tell you that it's staff's interest to get this project completed as quickly as we can as well. I can't explain the delay in the start of the design that predated our arrival, but you know, we are working as quickly and diligently as we can on the design to get it completed. But like I said, fundamentally, we still have an issue with private property.
Well,
And you know, until those properties are acquired and those easements procured, you know, we're in a holding pattern.
well, if you're having issues with those properties, isn't there legally, what can we do? I mean, we need to rebuild that underpass. Do we just let it go for another 20 years? Like, is there anything we can do legally if you're having problems with these properties? I think Deputy City Manager wants to. Tracy, you wanted to speak? You had your hand up.
No, through the chair, what I can commit to is to follow up with you offline once we have some feedback from real estate in terms of the progress that they've made on those properties.
Maybe I can, at what point legally, because we've invested millions of dollars in this project legally, what can the city do as far as if you're having difficulties with some of these properties? Like, what's our alternative? Does anybody know?
Hi, I'm here from legal. I mean, I'm not familiar with these properties myself, but I can certainly endeavor to get back to you on the status of the acquisition negotiations, but ultimately, the city would have power to expropriate.
My next question, okay, so if I can get an answer on that, because I'm really, every year when I look at this budget, it's really frustrating me when I keep having this project delayed. On page 3 of 7, it says that the various projects have experienced late tendering and award due to design, so these have been delayed. So what is the reason for the delay in the tendering? When we get the budget from transportation on a capital project, we would assume that the tendering and the processes, you've started the process to have it completed within that year's budget. So why is it that we have so many delays in the tendering? And then we keep carrying it over? Because that's costing the city a lot of money as well, is it not?
Have somebody to answer that at all?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I guess I'll fill this space. Certainly, the concern around late tendering is something that we will look at. I think your question around how we're budgeting the capital projects as it relates to where we are along the continuum of design to delivery actually reflects back to the comments our CFO made in our reviewing our capital plan and looking at that realistically against where we are with the project as a stage gate through, where we are with the capacity to deliver, and there go the capacity to spend. So I think it's a fair question and something that we'll dig into further to understand where the tendering delays have caused delays in delivery.
Sorry, through the chair, if I can also jump in, and apologies for the delay in responding. And thank you, Tracy, for. Well, it's probably slightly disingenuous to say delay in tendering, because what it's really about is about capital coordination and the way that transportation work is always the last in to do work. And as you're aware, through our capital coordination process, we coordinate all of our works with utilities and other people who are out there on the roadway. So often we're held up from tendering our projects because the moment we tender it, we need to then get on with the work. So if someone's out there on the roadway, often we're waiting for them to complete their work. And if they're a bit later completing, then we can't tender and move our project forward. So it's not tender delays caused specifically by us at the city or through city staff. We're very actively managing our projects, I can assure you. So it's about the knock-on impacts of the capital coordination.
Thank you. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you. So my first question is, I think it's great we're moving towards budgeting based on actuals and ability to spend, but what is being done in parallel to improve the way that we're doing contract and schedule management so that we have almost like an early warning detection system? Like, we're reporting back on actuals at each quarter, but can we also report back on heads up on schedule, that, you know, forecasting out forward the shortages that are happening, you know, next year, next month, et cetera?
So through the chair, that's exactly what our reallocation report is doing. It's bringing a heads up that we're looking forward, we're looking at what we're going to spend and the progress with individual projects throughout the year. And we're seeing where, if spend isn't materialising, where previously that's just sat there languishing in the budget, which has reduced our overall spend rate, it's far more better for the city if we can proactively move that money out and focus on delivering and spending what we can spend this year. So I would say the reallocation reports is really a symptom of far better active management of our budget and far more active management of the financial aspects of the project management.
So how much of that reallocation are we doing right now? Because if we're looking at coming in at a 70% spend, presumably there's 30% of budget that could be reallocated that makes us come in at 100% spend. So we're not reallocating efficiently, and how can we improve that?
Well, through the chair, we need to recognise that this is the Q2 variance, so this is only to the end of June. What we need to do is we can look forward and we can make projections about what we think is going to be the year-end spend. At the end of June, we'd only just started into the construction season. As we come forward for the Q3 variance, we'll be in a far better position to say exactly what we'll spend. So you may see another reallocation report from us a bit later on. I wouldn't expect it to be anywhere near the magnitude of this one, but we actively monitor our budgets on a monthly basis. We sit down rigorously with each of the project managers. They do a monthly projection of what the next month's spend is going to be, and we have a rigorous cross-examination of them based on that, and then we do our regular projection.
But how much lead time do you need if you're saying, okay, we don't know where construction's ending up yet because it's still ongoing, I get that, we're still going to have a whole quarter. How much lead time do you need to procure what's happening in Q4?
So a lot of those elements have been, so a lot of the projects have been procured already. In fact, all of our contracts will be out now. So work will be underway, but some of it's dependent on the weather. So if, for example, we have an early winter and some of our road reconstruction and resurfacing work has to stop earlier, then that's going to impact on our spend. So at the moment, we can just make assumptions about what the weather's going to do, and the fact that we're going to be able to be fully productive throughout the whole construction season. But it's only later on in the year that we actually fully know that.
Right, and I recognize that. So do we have, for example, a list? We know some projects are quick to procure and they're easy, they're simple. Like, do we have things are we managing our projects in a way where we know things that could quickly be accelerated to fill an unexpected, gap in budget, and we can spend that money? Like, so for example, I'll throw out an example, the school zones. We're putting 3 in a year in my ward right now. Very slow. It's going to take, 15, 20 years to roll all of these out. It's very simple compared to a major road reconstruction. But if we know that we're going to have budget, and this work can happen in Q4, do we have a list of things like that we can push forward quickly to try and come in closer on 100% on spend?
So through the chair, yes, we do have a backlog of work, which In some instances, we can accelerate because the contracts to deliver that work are in place, and we can vary those to do that. Where it becomes slightly more difficult is, and we used to do this with, for example, road reconstruction and resurfacing work, where if for capital coordination reasons we weren't able to do one stretch of road, we'd substitute in other stretches of road to do that. The difficulty that presents is that that then alters the quantities which were in the contracts, and I think it was before your time, Councillor, but Transportation Services had an audit by the Auditor General of our paving contracts in 2016, and that was one of the things that we were heavily criticised for. So we've had to change our working practices to ensure that the contractor who wins the work originally based on the original quantities would, in any changes we make, still remain the winning contractor. So it's very difficult for us now to move and substitute projects in and out of the programme.
Okay, thank you.
There's also the coordination issue as well, of course. So, you know, we need to coordinate all of the works that's being undertaken by every party on the road. So there may be other work that's planned by a utility or by Toronto Water, which means that we then can't go in and do our work.
No, I absolutely agree, but that's why my question was really about looking at the complexity of the projects, and they're not all at the same level of complexity. And I know that we coordinate based on priority, and I understand that, but then are we also organizing based on complexity? So that gives us the ability to accelerate and move around. It's like a giant puzzle, right? And I appreciate that it's very difficult, but I think there are ways we can build that puzzle faster. And certainly, like, I'm hopeful that changing this budget process is one, but also looking at the way we're managing schedule and contract as well. It's the two have to go hand in hand.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Seeing none. Speakers? Seeing none, Councillor Layton move the motion, or I'll move the recommendations, I guess. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, last item, BU 8.10, additional funding to support Toronto Police Services' immediate response to increase levels of gun violence and to keep communities safe. We do have a deputation. Miguel? Welcome. You know, I've never had a deputant ask me to hold their time. Thanks, Miguel.
Oh my God, you guys are very fast this morning, really fast. Okay, so let's start with this conversation about the increasing of $1.5 million made by the Toronto mayor. As you are aware, John Tory requested we approved the hiring of 300 police officers for this year 2019 budget. John Tory, on his letter, he's requesting $1.5 million from the city tax stabilization reserve, which is, I think, something that City Hall has been asked before to subsidize the cost of TTC fares for people who cannot afford it. Sometimes we use the money to help people who have lost everything due to bed bugs, and they need to buy, furniture. So I have an idea or a suggestion, a bold suggestion. I can highlight it. This is the budget chart from the Toronto Police Services Board. Councilor Carroll may be aware of that one. This is the line line 85. It deals with legal indemnification requests. So how much money is there? $1.6 million. So I wonder, why cannot go back to the police union and tell them, look, guys, we already hired 300 police officers. Why don't we just invest in our communities instead? That's what we should be doing. Invest in our poor communities. That is the answer to our gun violence. We are not investing enough in our communities, but here we are trying to comply with the request of the mayor that we need to have $1.5 million more. I want to bring to you a sad story. This is the case of a teenager who got arrested and brutalized by Toronto Police Services last month. He was only 14 years old. What a shame. And you know what's the problem here? These cops are going to stay home collecting money because that's part of the collective union agreement. And the problem is, we, the city, pay for their legal indemnifications, to have a lawyer to represent them. We, the public, we have zero, nada, to represent us when we have problems with the Toronto police. So how is it possible that we are wanting to increase the budget when they behave in such a manner, abusively of children, poor children that live in communities like Regent Park, but this one happened in North York. Look at this chart. This is from the CBC News. This is what an example how much you pay on property tax, $3,000. Much of it is to cover the police services board and services. Look at the bottom of the list. Child care expenses. We only spent $59.28. That's a shame. We should increase that amount so we don't have to struggle with child care spaces. Just ask Mike Layton. He has a child. He has reportedly having problems with that. So we should be investing again in our communities. In our communities. This is what the way we should go because we know the answer to violence is guns. So I support the banning of guns. That is the model that we should ask John Tory to ask his buddy Justin Trudeau to have Jonas and stop the selling of guns in the city of Toronto. That is the way to go. Wake up!
Thank you, Miguel. We'll go now to the item. There are questions of staff. I'll begin with Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm not sure who's going to be able to answer this question about what are they going to spend the $4.5 million on? Just out of curiosity, I'm looking for something a little bit more specific than deployment of additional resources or a response to increased levels of gun violence. What is this money going to go towards?
Yes, Deputy Raymer, sir. We're redeploying resources. There'll be a lot of additional resources deployed through overtime and callbacks. It's equipment for those additional resources because within our current fleet of vehicles and that, we cannot staff or supply the vehicles for the additional resources that will be deployed. It's also equipment, particularly with respect to our work in terms of intelligence and technical operations.
So equipment for the callbacks, cars.
Yeah.
I don't suspect individually you need to buy more equipment for officers, but a division would need a couple more vehicles.
That's correct. So we have we've gone on a 3-month lease for 62 vehicles.
You're going to lease 62 vehicles for 3 months?
That's correct.
And are they you're going to paint them like police cars?
No, they won't. They'll be unmarked police vehicles.
These will be unmarked vehicles. And then the surveillance, the final line item, is that CCTV cameras? Is this capital investment? Is it an investment that will continue to exist after?
There will be budgeting for the purchase of 40 additional CCT cameras, but that is above and beyond the $4.5 million that we're talking about here.
So that's somewhere else in
That's correct.
The budget. Then what type of equipment is that third item? I'm just wondering what.
What third item are we speaking about?
Well, you said it was the equipment, the overtime and callbacks, and then you said there was an additional amount of money being spent on operations.
It's essentially equipment and overtime and callbacks.
Okay. So the vehicles and the callbacks are the two.
Yeah, but there's also technological equipment that I'm really not in a position to elaborate on, but there's that aspect in terms of our intelligence operations as well.
So can you give me an idea about what the ratio is between the vehicle leases, the overtime and callbacks, and this unknown technology?
I don't have, the vast majority of the money is callbacks and overtime.
Okay.
We are actually, at this point in time, though, tracking to be significantly underspent because we're having difficulty filling because of the demand on the officers through the normal course of operations as well.
And it's towards the end of the year. Typically, this is the time you get difficulty finding people to fill overtime.
Well, it's been a long year.
Summer.
We've had people working hard through the summer as well, so it does get a little bit more difficult, yes.
Yeah. So you're looking at underspending, or like you're having a difficult time finding the callbacks. Is there a way of addressing that?
Well, we're still working on it. On our investigative side of the house, we're tracking to be using the allotted amount. But on the uniform side, we're having difficulties. So we're looking for other areas in the organization for people to step up and commit to some of those operations in terms of going back into uniform for high visibility policing.
Okay, thank you very much. This is just to our CFO, and you might need to delegate some of these numbers off. Do you know how much we spend on our poverty reduction file, sort of writ large?
I'll have to get back to you.
Can anyone, or like the youth strategy, the implementation of the youth strategy, can anyone give me a number for, like, what do we spend across the corporation for either of those two things? Okay. Okay. That's fine. I think for council, that's enough time. We got a lot to lead up.
So anticipate those questions coming at council. Councillor Carroll, did you have questions? No. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I guess I will go to speakers. Councillor Carroll, I believe.
Yeah, I'll put my motions right on so that they can be part of the discussion. The first one, I'll do the general one first, and it's self-explanatory. People will recall their request that City Council, in light of the recent spate of gun violence, requests the federal government to reconsider City Council's earlier request in item 2019 CC 44.14, immediate steps to address gun violence, to fund the unfunded applications under the National Crime Prevention Grant, totaling $26.2 million over the next 5 years, and requests the City Clerk to forward this request to all members of Parliament. Toronto members of Parliament, that is. And the financial motions are as follows: that City Council increase the 2019 operating budget for social development, finance and admin to implement 1 year of the Towards Peace program, Towards Peace program, funding of 1.292 gross and net to be provided from a one-time draw from the city's tax stabilization reserve. And the part two is that City Council direct the Executive Director of SDF&A to include year 2 funding for Towards Peace as part of the 2020 budget submission. So, councillors, this morning we adopted the operating variance program. And what it projects is that by the end of the year, you will have a $98.8 million variance in corporate accounts, not overall, in corporate accounts. That means it's not an accident of squeezing departments or anything. That's an overage in terms of our investment earnings. It's an overage in terms of what we projected in MLTT. This morning in the Globe and Mail real estate section, they said we can expect that trend to continue because implausibly, we actually still do have a slight shortage of condo dwellings, and so condo prices remain strong and the traffic is good. That's what it says this morning in the Globe and Mail. So if you're going to have that almost $100 million at the end of the year, not from squeezing service delivery anywhere, my financial motion is saying if out of the property tax stabilization reserve you can come up with $1.5 million for policing to deal with violence, what we heard the community say loud and clear, Mr. Avila is reflective of our community. He showed us activists marching down streets, but I can tell you in the most affluent of my communities, when I e-blasted about this summer, what I got back from the most unlikely sources was, yes, address the roots of violence. Policing is not going to do it. Please invest in the roots of violence. The following week, we got the announcement of these monies from other orders of government, and the Premier sort of focused on the camera part of the expenditure, and we got social media being blasted with, really, cameras? So Mr. Avila, he might be a frequent visitor of this room, but he actually is reflecting the community right now. They want you to do more than policing, and they want you to do it now. If we wait until our budget process and we adopt something at the end of February, will it really be on the ground in the summer? Well, what I have moved is a program that's already been designed, properly costed out, and was proposed to the federal government. It was one of the programs that we asked of the federal government. But what I'm looking at is, can we actually build into our base some of these youth programs? This one, Towards Peace, takes all of the programs we already have and creates an integration table that pulls them together so that the young man leaving the police diversion program, if he needs more, there's someone to make sure that happens after they let him go. And I didn't pull this out of my own hat. I spent all day yesterday working with staff to say, what do you think would make the most impact right now? What is the best thing to do with the resources we have? If we were going to stick our necks out and spend more money, let's spend for impact. What's your very, very best design program that's ready to go? Now, they would say to you, you know, you could reduce that to 6 months of dollars. You could change the numbers. That's up to them. But I'm saying we really need to reflect our community. That's our job as politicians, to reflect what community wants. And right now, they want you to make a solid, impactful, and immediate investment in addressing the roots of violence. I'm not a person who likes to add to the budget. You know that about me. But that's why I'm moving this now, because it's needed now. It can't wait for a hiring that might happen after next summer. Those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. I just want to inform you that I will have to be moving your motion 1B out of order. Clerks have notified me, and I'll give the rationale, that what's before the committee is the Toronto Police Services operating budget to fund a specific program. Councillor Carroll's motion is to amend the social development SDFA budget, which is different. So just on a procedural motion, I will have to rule it out of order. If this does happen to come to council in the proper form, it would be in order, but just for the...
So on a point of order, the proper form would be I can serve it to council as a notice of motion. There's still written notice of motion time right now?
Yeah, I think there's still time, but if Council Speaker can...
Yeah, Councillor Carroll, I would recommend that you bring it forward as a member's motion, and I would be more than happy to second that motion.
Okay.
I thank you very much for that. Thank you.
So again, just on procedural, that was the reason why, and so I will have to rule that out of order. The second motion, again, it's a little broader in context, so that is actually fine. Even though it's kind of related, there's a broader context. It's just because it's very specific to a specific budget that has to be ruled out of order. So, I appreciate that. Okay.
Can I just, on a point of order, just clarify? Because the motion itself does mention, sorry, not the motion, but the letter in front of us does mention the SDFA budget. It's just the motion isn't specific to it, but it
well,
does
again,
mention.
even because it's related to this item. Now, if this item had been brought as a walk-on or a separate item from BU 8.10 with the proper notice, it would have been fine. It's just because it's attached and related. That's the only reason that it can't be. So, but again, the second motion is fine from my perspective. So, okay. Other speakers? Councillor Layton?
Yes, thank you very much. Before I echo some of Councillor Carroll's remarks, I'd like to put forward a motion that City Council requests the City Manager to report back during the 2020 budget process on a requirement that any funding increase to Toronto Police Services budget to address crime must be matched with funding of twice that amount to programs and services that address the root causes of violence and poverty reduction. It's often very, very easy for politicians in instances like this, and we see this reoccurring over and over again, for politicians to rush to put money together to give police resources in times of crisis like this. And that's, like, I think it's a natural response to say we need more police in times of increased gun violence. I think it's a genuine, natural response. But what I think is more difficult, and what troubles me about the motion as it stands, which I will be supporting, but what troubles me is it ignores the root causes. It's saying, and it's barely a Band-Aid, it's saying let's deal with it at the very end and help catch more criminals rather than actually help prevent crime. Like CCTV cameras, which I understand are above and beyond this amount, but additional cars and police services just catches criminals faster. Doesn't actually do anything to reduce the amount of gun crime, right? It might push it into different corners. It might mean we catch the people that are perpetrating it at a quicker rate. But it seems to me like it's missing part of the point. So I will be supporting the mayor's motion. But I think if we're going to say it's important to catch the people that are committing these crimes, then it's doubly important for us to say we have to do something to prevent them in the first place. And I think if you asked any expert, either someone with lived experience, someone in the offices at the Dalalana School of Public Health, or maybe even the officers on the front line, what would be your top 10 things to actually reduce violence in our city? You know where surveillance would probably be? It'd probably be 9th or 10th. You know where programs like Towards Peace, like alleviating the root causes of violence through addressing issues of poverty and inequality would be? Pretty high on that list for most of them. There may be some juggling around of those, but it'd probably be pretty high. But it's the more difficult thing to do. It takes longer, it doesn't have immediate payoffs, and the violence might not get any better in the next week, month, or year. But over the long term, that's where we should be making the investments. But rather than say, let's take money from police and put it into these services, I'm saying no. If we're going to put money into police, let's put twice as much into the cure, into prevention, rather than the end of pipe. Let's just put twice as much. Let's not take it away from one pocket, because people need to be safe and feel safe now. But let's make sure for the next generation that they're not going to be in this same situation. Because I think that that's all we're really doing if all we're saying is we're going to catch the criminals faster, is we're leading down that same road. So I'm not 100% confident this will pass today or even be in order at this stage. But I would suggest that this is the type of direction that we should be going as a city. With that, I will also support Councillor Carroll's motion. I think the federal government, who seem to have it right by calling their program the National Crime Prevention Strategy, which funds SDFA projects rather than simply funding police. That seems to be the right course that we should take. So let's get the money we need from them, but let's also make it reflective in our own budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata and Bradford. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor McKelvey had questions? Okay, we have questions of the mover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Layton, your motion is very specific on twice. And I'm just wondering, you are asking for a report back, but can it be broader than that? Because maybe it's 3 times, or maybe it's 1 time, or maybe it's reallocation. Like, I get where you're going in principle, but the twice is very specific.
So twice was, and it was more symbolic. One of my drafts of this had 3 times, and several of my colleagues said perhaps twice was appropriate, and don't go for 3 times. And then drafts of this motion looked at an entire shift. Take the $1 billion that we give police, and let's make sure we're spending $2 billion on poverty reduction, or on youth services, or like let's change the whole budget like we do in our taxing strategy. Over time, what we did was we shift the tax burden towards residential taxes from commercial. I actually kind of envisioned that the city manager could come back with the same thing, saying in time we might actually need less policing budget and want to continue the investment in poverty reduction. It's quite arbitrary, I will admit, the twice. I would prefer it to be 10 times. I thought that this was a saleable number to do.
So are you prepared that staff come back with a recommendation that's not necessarily twice, but has other measures that would be based on evidence and things they're looking at? It could be more, it could be less, could be reallocation, could be a shift in strategy.
If they came back with something that said, this is what you needed to address the root causes of violence, and this is the level of investment, and they did so based on our existing, like, these aren't new plans, I didn't bring them with me, but the poverty reduction plan, the youth, our youth, plan for youth, if they came back and said we can implement these with this level of resources, then I'd be happy with the outcome.
So they can look at that also in terms of like ability to spend.
Well, let's
ability to execute and ability to deliver.
Sure, but let's be clear. What they've actually been instructed to do for the most part is come back with no increase or come back with an inflationary increase, not with double the increase to the police budget. And that's what I'm trying to get to, is we should let our staff be bold and come back with larger asks than what they've been instructed to by either the city manager or the mayor's office, and through the budget committee by way of a letter from the mayor's office. Give them that latitude to say, if you're going to put a number on what you need to increase the police budget by to address the gun crime, then let's look at allowing staff from SDFA, staff from Children's Services, staff from Parks and Rec to come forward with asks that are above what the city has, what the city manager or council has said is the maximum ask they can come back with.
So ultimately, it's about a better coordination between our police budget and our SDFA budget.
I want us to understand that the police budget isn't about enforcement, that budgets like SDFA, budgets like the Parks and Recreation budget, our library budget, all of those things are about actually alleviating the root causes of violence, not more money to police.
So they should be looked at in parallel.
Sure. Another way to put it is we should put resources that will actually have a long-standing impact on reducing the causes of violence.
Thank you.
Twice
Councillor Bradford, you had a question too?
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for the motion. I had some similar questions. The language in the motion, could we get that on the screen again? So I agree with all of the sentiments and the importance to address the root cause of violence, and I recall, our chief making the comments that a 5-year-old doesn't start off wanting to shoot someone. Things happen in their lives along the way that lead to those circumstances, and I think that's what you're getting at here. The motion, the way it's written, I think kind of what Councillor McKelvey was pointing out there is it's not one thing. It's not just an increase to the police budget. It's supplementary supports, wraparound services that address the root causes here. I guess the question is, are you really interested? Is there an interest in perhaps a value for money assessment of the money that we're spending across all these different buckets? So we're going to spend 1.5 million on additional police resources, which I could say I had a meeting in my community 2 weeks ago and they want that. But value for money as it relates to addressing gun crime and gun violence in this city on all the different tools that we can do. Would that be helpful?
We have a poverty reduction strategy. We have our youth services strategy. I can't remember what the actual youth. So we have plans in place that have been developed by experts, by our city staff, and by people with lived experience.
Right.
I'm saying implement those. So look at the TO, the Towards Peace program. This is a program we have on the books. We can roll out faster. Staff have indicated it's got good value. So those are the types of things that I think we could, would serve us well if we were investing in that side of the equation. If we keep going by the statistics, right? If we keep going by the statistics, well, the police, there's more police patrols. That sounds great. And it probably makes people feel a whole lot safer. We're solving more gun crime. Fantastic. That's great. But it has nothing to do with reducing the amount of gun crime, which is what we should, investments in other programs do, like our strategy to address poverty, like our issues ensuring that our youth have opportunities and access to services. Like, that's what actually reduces it. But you're not going to be able to break it down in such a clear-cut manner as a comparison of having more police on the beat, because these are long-term strategies. These are investments in our community, rather than just simply, well, a measure of safety is the number of people that are arrested for gun crime. That's not a measure of safety.
Well, I think that actually I would push back and suggest that there are metrics that we can look at with respect to safety in our neighborhoods. And you know, the fact that we're here right now is because we're having another increase in gun violence and shootings and deaths in the city of Toronto this year.
And our response
you
to
can
this
point to
is,
that.
our response to this increase is exactly the same response we've had every other time.
Well,
More money to police, rather than actually looking at the root causes.
what if the budget
and I'm not saying take money away from police. What I'm saying is make a commitment. If you're putting money into police, make a commitment to actually going at the root causes. Don't just continue down the same mistaken path you've done before.
I think we all agree that we need to address the root causes.
Then I'm glad you'll support my motion.
Well, first of all, your motion says, well, let's read your motion, because it says to address crime. And I think like a lot of what the Toronto Police Services does addresses crime. So the language I would have used was gun violence, because that's what the letter and the item is that we're responding to today. So for example, that's an amendment I would make. I would also say that the ratio.
Gun violence isn't the only thing that a crime that's a result of poverty, of inequality, of youth not having access to services.
Councillor Layton, I'm looking at item BU 8.10, which is increased levels of gun violence. That's the item that we're responding.
Yes.
So that's the language I would use.
But is that all that the police are going to be using these additional callback?
We heard from them. We heard from them today, and that was what they were saying. That's what this money is directed towards.
You really think that the exact amounts that we're addressing here are going to go just to additional gun violence? No, it's going to an enhanced police service.
This motion is proposing a ratio, and I think you said, I think the language that you said yourself was it's an arbitrary number.
It is.
And I don't think that arbitrary numbers is the way that we should be addressing such a complex and difficult issue.
If you don't think that the causes of root violence and combating the causes of root violence are easily twice as important as enforcement. I'm just saying, if you don't think that they're easily twice as important as arresting people at the end of the day, then feel free to vote against my motion.
It would have been nice if you talked to people about it beforehand.
Thank you, Councillor. The time is up. Councillor Carroll.
I'd like to respond to that final comment, because this is coming from a councillor who's also walked on items about a variety of things at this committee, which is nice. It is nice to have the time to go around and talk to people. The mayor didn't talk to any of us, or perhaps he talked to the budget chief, which I granted he should have. Didn't talk to any of us before he put the motion on the agenda, and we have 5 days with it. So we do our very best, Councillor Bradford, to get motions in front of colleagues. I've done you that favor when I've had it in advance. I did not have it in advance. We completed this motion.
Did you write it this morning?
It was written.
We talked yesterday.
It was written last night.
Councillor Carroll, I will comment on the motion when I. Well, no, just with regard, again, I do respect where Councillor Bradford has come. It's the first time I'm also seeing the motion here. There's a line, as you could appreciate, on, as I moved that Councillor Carroll's motions were not in order. This is a little bit broader in the fact that the councillor is saying we're going to bring it to 20. If this didn't have the 2020 budget process on, it wouldn't happen. There's a fine line here. I think I do recognize the fine line. Would it have been better to have been circulated to us to have that opportunity? It always is, specifically the chair. I haven't had that opportunity, but when I did look at that, it is in order. Technically, maybe not. I could rule it out of order, but again, in the spirit of what I think everyone is trying to achieve here, that conversation has to continue. And I think in that, this motion at least does that. Potentially, can we amend it? This is going up to council. We can look at it differently, but this is a conversation at a later period. And I think that conversation prior to council, if we do have to amend it, again, as I said, this is what it's like, unfortunately, when you have motions that come and we haven't had the opportunity to look at them prior, because we do need to get some advice, and it may end up being having to speak to somebody else. So on that, that's why hence I did not, it is in order. But there is that argument to not, but I chose to consider that this is an appropriate motion. Councillor Carroll, questions?
So can I still ask my question?
Oh, yeah.
So I just want to ask a question, because in the questioning, we've gone from this is a broad mandate to staff to report back to me, but then we've gone burrowing down into the specifics. Can I just ask what your expectation is of, it's a question of the mover.
Councillor Layton, you have a question.
It's a question
Pardon
of
me.
the mover.
I'm so sorry.
Can I
I'm so
just
sorry,
ask how much leeway you're giving staff here? Because I think it might give councillors comfort. This is a policy motion. So while you're asking them to report back during the 2020 budget process, it's not necessarily going to lead to specifically what happens in the budget process. In my perfect world, I would have moved a motion that says when there's a one-time infusion to police services to address gun crime from other orders of government, can we double it with that? All of those types of things are things that you want staff to consider and report back what they think is the best way to nail down a policy? Yeah. You're okay with giving them that much leeway in their report back?
So the reason why it was pushed to a report back rather than direction
Yeah.
in the next budget is
yes.
it may result that we want to put quite a bit more into social services and SDFA and the alleviating the root causes of violence than we do in the police, to be honest. And I hope we give that opportunity. The reason why I wouldn't say it's only at one-time infusions of cash from other level of government is one, I don't have a high level of confidence in either of those other two levels of government in making the right decisions here. And the second piece is I don't think it's only one time. Like, I think if we take our buckets and say we spend this much on poverty reduction, that might be able to include things like public transit and affordable housing and all of these other things, and we take the bucket we give the police, we may want to actually structurally make that change, as I mentioned earlier, far beyond just one-time infusions of money.
But you'd be okay receiving back staff's best advice. And so if staff were to report back, every penny we give the police is to address crime, so here's our best advice, you'd be happy to wait till the report comes back to take that advice.
That's
and
why
then craft the
it was a request for a report back.
Right.
What I would
And we can
suggest,
do
however,
this
though,
work then.
is we can't be stuck in this notion that we have to have this increase coming out of our, we have to have this increase in coming out of individual budgets and no more, and yet the police budget can continue to go down a path where it has enormous increases on an annual basis, but we're not making the investments that we need in SDFA and our library system, in youth and poverty reduction, the root causes of violence. Rather, we're focusing on Band-Aid solutions. And so that's what I want staff to be given the confidence that they can come back with a budget or a recommendation in the budget that is more reflective of how do you actually address the root causes of violence.
But it's the policy you're looking for, not the dollar number.
I'm fine if it's just the policy. If they come back and say, over the course of time, we want to see a increase in the spending on these social services because it will result in actually a reduction in crime and therefore less of a need for an investment in enforcement down the road.
Okay, Mr. Chief, thank you for that indulgence. I'm clear now.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other,
I have a question, then I want to speak, please.
Councillor Nunziata, questions?
Yes, so Councillor Layton, would you support an amendment in your motion rather than,
You're not allowed to actually speak to the committee. I'm sorry. Councillor Nunziata,
can you put the motion on the screen, please?
the amendment.
No, just put the motion, Councillor Layton's motion. I'm asking Councillor Layton questions.
Okay, there's questions on,
So when the city manager reports back, would you support an amendment, a friendly amendment, rather than, hold on, twice the amount? Just match the amount?
So I won't accept that as a friendly amendment, and I'll tell you why. And I appreciate that you're making it in the friendliest of ways, but I want to reinforce to staff and to the city that we are concerned and ready to make the investments in the root causes of violence rather than simply a Band-Aid solution. Again, not to take away from the need for enforcement or the need to invest in it, but to say we think it's more important if you want to say 1.1 times, if you want to say 1 point, we have to make it clear that our priority is actually reducing the causes of violence and not simply catching more criminals.
Councillor Layton, I agree with you, and I think we all agree on where you want to go, but I think the wording of your motion is to say twice. I think that it would be appropriate to wait for the staff to report back to us and give us some suggestions, recommendations, rather than put twice the amount. It's a little premature, because at that time, we really don't know what the staff report will come back, what the staff would recommend in this year's budget. So I then would move an amendment to delete that and put match. Okay.
When
Yeah.
you speak, you can move the amendment, and we'll have to determine whether or not we support it.
So I would recommend that we delete twice the amount and just match. Just insert match. And also what I would like to move as well is a motion that the city council requests the city manager as well, when he reports back, to report back during the 2020 budget process on opportunities for partnerships with existing agency to fund programs and services that address the root causes of violence and poverty reduction. Because I think there's an opportunity as well, rather than the funding portion of it, that Councillor Layton motion is to partner with some of the agencies, because there are a number of agencies that are out there that I think that we could partner with, which we give funding to and maybe increase their budgets and actually provide more of the services that they're providing. And the reason, and I'll speak now, the reason why we're increasing the police budget, and we have, is because we had a hiring freeze. And so we are way below staffing complement, and that's why we're catching up now, and that's why when we do increase the police budget, we're increasing it to get back where we were. And the reality is, and in my ward where I've had the majority of homicides, and I will be working with the youth in my ward, trying to organize a youth forum and a town hall with the youth and talk about what they would, what their issues are, what they would like to see improvements in their community, especially the Falstaff community, where we had the 16-year-old that was shot in the stairway. And so I'm going to be working with the youth, and I can tell you that I had a public meeting shortly after the homicide, and we had over 200 people. The chief was there, and we heard from all the mothers, including the mother of the 16-year-old, that we want more police officers. The biggest issue for them is we want to see more police officers. We want security cameras. We want lighting at Toronto Housing. And that was their main concern, was we want to see more police officers around Falstaff. And so I am responding to my community, because my community is asking for increased security and increased staffing. And so that is why we need to, and we have increased the police budget, is to target these areas that are having difficulties and that are going through, in the past couple months, to bring the community at ease. The community is now saying, I get emails from residents saying, I'm afraid to walk the street, I'm afraid to go out, I'm afraid, and that's why we need the increase in policing. I hope, Councillor Lane, I hope you would support my amendment as far as the matching, and also my amendment as far as working with other agencies, because I do know with the youth hubs, there is the Girls and Boys Club that would want to get very involved, and we received their letter last year when there was a motion by Councillor Matlow asking for increase in hubs. They asked that we defer that because they wanted to work with the city and work with the community on identifying locations where these youth hubs should be located. So I think that we need to partner with these agencies, so I'm asking for that report as well.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Bradford.
Speak on the item very quickly. Had a motion. I don't think I'm going to move it at this time, but I would like to. This is such a heartbreaking and emotional issue that we face in our city. Beaches East York has experienced some of this over the course of the summer, and we had a meeting up at Parma Court in Wakanda Place about 2 weeks ago. And we had over 100 residents come out, primarily from TCH, the property there, but from the broader community as well. And I can tell you that those residents are scared, they're not satisfied, and they do want to see additional investments in our Toronto Police as a response. They were saying that they don't feel safe in their community, and the stories that they were sharing with everyone in the room was it was heartbreaking. We know that is one component of addressing gun violence in this city, and that it is a whole lot more in addressing the core factors that really lead people into a life of crime and violence. And I appreciate Councillor Layton's motion. That is what he is trying to emphasize, and it's symbolic. And I appreciate that. We do have a lot of programs that are looking to address that, but of course we need to do more because, again, you can look at the data and you can look at the evidence and we're not moving in the right direction. And so I was very grateful for having the superintendent of Division 54, 55 to come out and to listen and to speak with the residents. And, he will be advocating to have, a police officer as part of the neighborhood community officer program, dedicated teams in neighborhoods that are building these relationships and building trust with the community. And that's a huge important part of it as well. So it's a complicated issue. This injection of capital, 1.5 million from the city and the other levels of government is important. And, frankly, we should be moving forward with that. And I think that's the intention. But of course not at the expense, and it's not, but not with the other services investments in our communities that we know are necessary to address the root causes of violence in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I think, okay, I'll speak last. First off, I will be supporting Councillor Layton's motion and the amendment. I recognize the spirit of what Councillor Layton is trying to do. Regardless of how it's worded, I think if there needs to be revisions as it moves forward to executive and to full council, that would probably be a good thing. But I don't want the words to be lost, or I don't want the words to lose the intent of what he's attempting to do. So it may end up being that we have to look at this a little bit further as it moves up. Hence why I'll seek reporting, because I do understand, I do agree with him what he's attempting to do, but we may need to work this a little bit better so by the time it gets to council, it makes sense for everybody. I do want to stress, though, in this conversation that we're having today, that we have made investments in community programs that help kids and families. And we're going to continue to do that. I just want to make sure we understand that. I recognize the importance of gun violence and crime. We all are impacted differently in our different wards. Sometimes, and again, when you're looking at what happened in the summer, Councillor Nunziata is predominantly, she's having those challenges, as are other of us in the city. But we are making the investments. And I just want to remind everybody that today we're approving urgent funding by a request from the police for immediate operating and matching funds for the federal and provincial government. So that's what we're here for, and that's a good thing. And the more that we put into it is good. So that is really what we're doing. But don't forget, when we're looking at, and we've seen the programs that we're doing, the immediate steps to address gun violence that staff have done. We've already approved that. We're working on that. The question is, are we doing enough? And are we doing it quick enough? I think that's probably what more the conversation is. But we are doing immediate issues. We're dealing with long-term strategies to try to prevent gun violence. We have the upcoming Youth Services Program Review. Again, is going to be identifying, are we doing enough? Should we be doing more? More than likely, we'll suggest we need to do more. And I tend to, when I'm looking at these reports, I want to look at those fulsome reports and get a sense of what we need to do properly. Sometimes when we make these decisions on council or on committee, we don't have the full context behind us, and that's one of the frustrations sometimes. We feel the frustration of the community, hence we react in the way we do sometimes. But then I wonder and question, are we making the right decision for what we need to do? And sometimes it's not sure. That's why sometimes when we have staff bring these fulsome reports, it gives us the opportunity to do that. And again, also too with the federal government, we are working with the federal government. I understand that they haven't approved a lot of some of the stuff with the National Crime Prevention Strategy, but that's not to say that they won't. I do know that the Mayor's office and others are working actively with the federal government, and my hope is maybe by council, maybe before that, they will come forward and fund some of these initiatives that we, and then with the one that Councillor Carroll will probably be bringing. So on that, I get it, you know, but again, we have a process. The process is incredibly frustrating sometimes. But I just want to thank everybody for coming, and again, I'll be supporting the motion by Councillor Layton, and of course the amendment, and I'll work with you, Council. We'll figure out what needs to happen, you know, executive and to Council. So, on that,
Mr. Chairman,
we have.
if I could ask permission, I will withdraw my motion as far as the match, amending Councillor Layton's motion. Motion 2.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Carroll is going to remove her amendment to the motion. Okay. Okay. Okay, the first motion will be motion 1A by Councillor Carroll. It will be put up on the screen. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion 2 by Councillor Layton. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion 3B by Councillor Nunziata. Oh, sorry. Oh, you have your Councillor Nunziata, not the amendment, but the. Yeah, okay. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Item as amended. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, can I have a recorded vote on that last one?
On the item as amended, all in favor, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Carroll, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor McKelvey.
And Councillor Layton, probably?
Yes. And Councillor Layton, that carries unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. We are now adjourned.